Hi, everybody. I am here with Gemma today, and we're going to talk a little bit about goal setting and commitment levels and all of that fun stuff. But to start out, Gemma, do you just want to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about how you got into horses?
Sure. I started riding when I was 8. I did a lot of trail riding for the first, I would say, like half of my riding career. I basically just trail rode. And I got my first horse Gage when I was 14, who then became, the That.Blue.Roan of TikTok and Instagram semi fame, I suppose. And in the time between like that, since I got Gage, I have done about as many disciplines as I could get my hands on. I was into 4-H for quite a while. I did drill team, had a bit of a show jumping and eventing era. We've done trick riding, working cow horse, like anything I could possibly get my hands on. And now he's a little bit of a pasture puff because I don't ride him so much anymore. So that's where I am now.
I love that. So, I mean, this ties in nicely to what we're talking about today. I'm assuming that how much riding you've done throughout each of those phases has differed. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there were times when I was, doing lessons twice a week, riding like 5 or 6 times a week, especially when I was performing with my drill team. Gage was probably getting the most, miles under saddle then. And when you compare that to now, I mean, he gets ridden once a week if he's lucky, or unlucky, maybe from his perspective. I'm not sure.
Well, and that's great because I'm sure that he is kind of just as happy to sit in the pasture as he was to do all of those things.
Yeah, I mean, as much fun as I have had doing all of that stuff, I mean, Gage was always game for all of it. He was down to do whatever my crazy teenage self wanted to do, and I'm forever grateful for that. But honestly, I think he is at his happiest and most relaxed when he is just sitting in a field and eating. And maybe that's not, what people think horses are for, but no one told him because I think he's quite pleased just sitting around and eating and roaming around all day.
Yeah. Well, one thing I see is people feeling guilty about, like, oh, I feel like I should sell my horse because I'm not helping him live up to his potential or whatever, which I always think is so silly because, like you said, nobody told them about show jumping.
Yeah, I think definitely a lot of people feel that guilt. Like it's definitely common because, we're under pressure to, ride our horses a certain number of times per week or compete them at a certain level. Otherwise, they're getting wasted, especially if you have like a nice horse. One of my horses is registered Willow and one is grade Gage. So they're not coming from any kind of crazy bloodlines, but especially people who own, high end, well bred horses, they feel that if they're not doing the kind of stuff that they were bred for, then they're going to waste. And I don't really think it makes sense for an animal to go to waste because the horse, doesn't know who his parents were or his grandparents or what his siblings are doing. He knows that he likes to hang out with his buddies and eat food, and he doesn't know about how much he costs or his bloodlines or anything like that.
Right. Like, there are definitely horses I know who enjoy working and who enjoy being part of that partnership and have a good time. But I'm so certain that if they ended up in a giant field where they could run themselves around all day, they would also be just as happy.
Yeah, I try to remember that like horses have only really been domesticated by humans for a relatively short period of time, considering their like evolutionary history. And for the vast majority of history, they have basically just been hanging out in groups, eating like 20 hours a day and running away from predators. And that is basically how they got to where they are now. And so whenever I feel guilty that I'm like, oh, I'm not riding him, he's just, living in a field, I remember that is basically what his kind have been doing forever and ever. So that is kind of what he's meant to do.
Yeah, especially those grade horses that are just like a jumble of whatever. Like, the baseline genetics are eat grass, run away from predator.
Yeah, and I think like as much as I love riding, I think especially when we get really caught up in the competitive atmosphere of like everything about horses, we get caught up in this and we forget that we're dealing with animals. They're not like sports equipment, and we project all of our human thoughts and desires and our motivations onto them. And horses aren't stupid, but they certainly don't think the way that we do. There are horses that do love to be ridden and, you know, love to compete and enjoy that atmosphere. But I feel like a lot of it is people projecting that onto them and believing that their horse feels the same way that they feel. And maybe it's harsh to say, but I don't think that's always true. I think we totally anthropomorphize our horses a lot. And I'm definitely guilty of doing that too. You know, we all are. But we definitely have to be, you know, conscious of when we're doing it, because sometimes I can definitely tell when people are like projecting some human idea, you know, onto a horse. A horse doesn't think he's going to waste.
No, no. And there's a difference between being accustomed to a lifestyle and like wanting that lifestyle, if that makes sense. Like those competition horses, they're working every day. Like that is what they are used to. If they don't get worked every day, that's not their routine, and horses thrive on routine. So of course they're going to be weird. But like, I don't know. I have a pony who has gone through phases of his life where he's been worked every day, and now he's been sitting in a field for probably 5 years and he loves it. He's perfectly fine.
And definitely, I think a lot of ideas of like horse welfare and things like that are, I guess, rooted in ideas of like what we think looks good and what is glamorous. Like to people, we think big stables, fancy tack, nice lighting, all of this stuff in a barn that looks really good to us is what makes very good horse welfare. And I mean, I think it looks different to horses, because there are people sometimes when on my TikTok or whatever, if I make a video criticizing some aspect of horse welfare, you know, for example, stalling a horse 24/7, they often say, oh, well, your horse just lives in a field. He's not a competition horse. You don't get it. A horse that lives in a stall 24/7, well, he has a great life. You know, he has really nice tack and he has a beautiful stable. And it is all very beautiful from a person's perspective, but from that horse's perspective, why would he care about the dollar value on his saddle or the lighting in his stable or all that stuff when a horse doesn't care about that? A horse, you know, has basic horse instincts and basic horse needs, and that doesn't change whether he's a meat truck pony or, you know, a $500,000 competition horse.
Right. I mean, if we asked our athletes to sit in their bedroom all day and only come out for practice, we would have a human rights violation on our hands, like left and right. Like that's not kind or fair to anybody.
Yeah, and I mean, definitely turnout was one of my soapboxes, but it's not totally related. But I do find that often people use the like, oh, well, you're not competing at this level, therefore you have no right to criticize something that is going on. And that applies to a lot of welfare issues that I've seen. You know, it's a very common refrain like, well, you don't ride at the Olympics, you don't jump Grand Prix, your horse is a pasture puff, or you're a pleasure rider. So what right do you have to criticize? And, you know, maybe they have a point. Maybe I don't jump 1.60 and I can't and I never will. But that doesn't necessarily mean that those horses live a better quality life and are happier than my pasture puff horses from the horse's perspective. I think that if a horse is healthy, you know, they have no health issues as a result of not being ridden, and they have enough room and socialization with other horses, I think that is a horse's like baseline state of being. And I don't see how that could be bad, really, unless they're suffering from some kind of medical condition and you need to be intervening.
Right. I mean, really, the only issue that would come from letting your horse live outside in a pasture and not riding very often or only riding once a week is if you're riding once a week and then you are also trying to be jumping the 1.60 and like trying to do those things. Like that is an issue. But
yeah, and you know, some horses do have medical conditions, like, you know, if they have metabolic issues, you might have to, you know, regulate how much they're eating. You know, that is definitely not something that's easy to deal with. If your horse has Cushing's or any variety of things that might lead you to, you know, have to limit their time outside. It happens totally. And it is very unfair to take your horse that's been sitting in a pasture for 3 months and then expect him to perform like he's been in a training routine when he hasn't. That's like taking you off the couch and then throwing you into, I don't know, whatever sport of your choosing, like throwing you into a high level athletic competition. You're asking to get injured, or it's just going to be an all around unpleasant experience for you and the horse, I think. So that's definitely not something you want to be doing.
Right. But when it comes to horses, most people are riding horses for fun. Most people are amateurs. We're not out here trying to make money off of our creatures. We're spending our paychecks on our creatures. So it is like a situation of you get out of it what you put into it. And if what you want is to trail ride and have a buddy to hang out with every once in a while, then like there's no problem with riding once a week.
Yeah, definitely something that I found was like when I was a teenager is when I got to do all of, these things. I was competing, I was traveling, when I was doing all that, I was a teenager and I worked part-time, but I also was in school. That was like my only real responsibility. And my parents paid for everything because I was, lucky enough to be one of those people that had parents that supported their riding. And now that I am an adult, and I work full time, that impacts my riding a lot because I work full time and I have a lot of other responsibilities now besides my horses. It gets in the way. And I guess if you told me when I was 15 that I would be riding like once a week or less, she would not have believed me. She'd be like, "What?" But I ride every single chance I get because I had been desperate to own a horse for the longest time, that I was like, it was my dream and I was riding like every single day. And now I guess like 8 or 9 years like down the line, I still love my horses just as much. I'm still just as happy to have them, but just stuff gets in the way and it's unfortunate, but it is a reality of life.
No, 100%. I totally feel that because when I was like late middle school, like the summer after 8th grade through like early high school is when I was like competing the most, and I was at the barn like 6 or 7 days a week riding like 2 or 3 horses, and I was like schooling 3rd level dressage and like jumping 3-3 and doing all this stuff. I don't think I've jumped anything in like probably 2 or 3 years at this point.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat totally.
And like I just know that little 15-year-old me would be like, what are we doing? You own a horse now, why are you not riding every day? But like she wanted to be in the 2024 Olympics, and me, I don't care. I couldn't care less about that goal anymore.
When I was little, it was like, I don't know, I had a very warped idea of like what adulthood was. I thought as soon as I turn 18, I'm an adult and I'm going to be like a professional rider and a horse trainer and I'm going to be in the Olympics and stuff, because 18 is an adult and that is a reasonable time frame.
Yes.
When I was, like 7 or 8 years old. And I don't know if she would be disappointed or not. I think my younger self would think that I am very cool, but also would probably be disappointed that we're not in the Olympics by now. She had very unrealistic expectations of me.
No, 100%. 15-year-old me would be like, that podcast you have is super cool, but like, where's your performance horse? Why did you buy that draft thing? What are we doing?
Yeah, literally.
But I mean, again, it just comes back to commitment. Like, I'm still committed to having horses in my life, and like, sounds like you are as well. Like, that is an important staple. But I don't know, it doesn't feel as necessary to be out there competing and winning ribbons, so I don't need to be riding every day.
Yeah, I think that I'm trying to say this in a way that sounds really nice. I think that we as equestrians, me included, definitely we have a tendency to want to over exaggerate the importance of riding in our horses' lives. We want to say that my horse loves being ridden and my horse lives to be ridden and he wants to be ridden all the time. And, there are horses that certainly do enjoy riding. It's not that that isn't true, but I think we over exaggerate it to make ourselves feel very important in our horses' lives. Like, we provide something, riding, that they need. And I think the truth is the majority of horses don't need to be ridden. They like human interaction. They get something positive out of, bonding and interacting with people. But there are a lot of ways you can do that besides riding, even just teaching your horse some tricks or doing groundwork or hand grazing them. All of that, benefits your relationship that isn't riding. And honestly, I think if I never rode my horses ever again, I don't think they would be upset again, like ever. If I never got on Gage's back again, I don't think he would be upset. And it is a little bit damaging to my ego because I want to be like, he loves it so much. It's his favorite thing ever. But if I never rode him again, if I never swung a leg over, I don't think he'd be upset. If I never fed him another treat, he would be upset. But, that's a reality I have to accept personally.
100%. I was thinking as you were talking about how I always feel special when I go to the pasture because my horse comes up to me and says hi. And that has just as much to do with the fact that he's curious as it does to do with the fact that I always have cookies in my pocket and he gets one when he comes and says hi to me.
Yeah. I feel the same thing. I want to feel like I'm just, the specialist and most amazing person in the whole world because my horses come to me when I call them. It's also because I feed them when I call them. But, there's some part of me that wants to be like, we have a magical bond. No, I don't know if it's exactly magical, but like horses form positive associations with people and things that bring them good things. So that I can settle for that my horses, associate me with good things.
Right. Well, and it's absolutely impactful. Like, if you don't have a good relationship with your horse, you're going to have a lot harder time riding. Whereas if you have a good, solid, trusting relationship with your horse and your horse like trusts and respects you and you trust and respect your horse, you're going to be able to do a lot more and have a lot more fun. Like, that's not to mitigate the importance of your horse coming up to you in the pasture. It's just that, like, it's probably not because he loves his new saddle.
When I see someone, riding at a very high level, they're jumping, meter 40 or something like that. They're doing something very impressive. I think it's impressive. But if I can see behind the scenes and I can see that they can't, like, some of those horses don't want to be caught or they're very difficult to tack up. And like the whole before process is very like, the horse is clearly like something isn't right or the relationship isn't there between the horse and rider. It does diminish how impressed I am because I'm impressed that you can, go around a meter 40 course, but the fact that your horse runs away from you every time he sees you says to me that something isn't right. That should also factor in. I think it should be relevant.
Well, this is like my particular niche, so this is why this is a like example that I'm grabbing. But when I watch top level dressage riders nowadays, I'm always like cringing the entire time because all of their horses look so, not all, most of their horses look so stressed out and are so tense in a dressage test where the foundation is supposed to be relaxation and fluidity. And it is supposed to look like a seamless bond between horse and rider. And you can see the horses, like every muscle is tensed. And it's like, sure.
His eyes are like bugging out of his skull. And
right. Right. And you're like, okay, sure, that horse is technically doing a nice pee off, but like, it also looks like, given the chance, it would leap out of that ring and run away.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely a result of, judges not rewarding, I guess, what they should be rewarding because they're not rewarding that relaxation. They're rewarding, like, the flashy movements and stuff. And I think stuff like this, I mean, I don't want to sound like some kind of, I don't know, alarmist or something like that. But I think in the future, when we think about the future of equestrian sports, already people, non-horse people view riding as like a rich, posh, like snooty activity at best. And a lot of people already view it as animal abuse. So if we don't, I think, take a way stronger stance on stuff like that and, do a lot more to improve horse welfare in like the upper levels of the sport, I honestly think that competitive riding is going to go by the wayside, like in the future. I don't know how long it's going to take, but things like dressage will end up being taken out of the Olympics if things like these animal welfare, concerns keep going. And I don't know, maybe it makes me extreme to say that, but I think in the future, that is something we should think about. And especially in dressage, if we don't make a better effort to eradicate that kind of training, if we don't make a huge push towards horse welfare, we look so much worse in the eyes of the general public. And I think the future of riding really is in danger, especially like at the highest levels in the Olympics, stuff like that. It will end up getting taken out of the Olympics if we can't prove that the horses are happy and relaxed and willing athletes. And that's not what I see in a lot of upper level dressage right now. So
no, and I mean, we can see that in the pentathlon. Like, they took the horse part out. And, like, granted, none of those people should have been riding horses anyway. Like, I'm not disagreeing with the choice to take horses out of the pentathlon. It was upsetting to watch that sport. But it's a possibility now. It's been opened up as an option to, like, take out those sports, which, honestly, if it's bad for the horses and if there are severe wellness issues, it should be taken out of the Olympics and it should be re-examined.
Yeah, hot take. I agree with that. I know as horse people, we want to protect, we want to defend every discipline and we want to, protect it against like other non-horse people who don't understand, but sometimes the non-horse people from an outsider's perspective who just don't get it, sometimes they do get it and they see certain things that we've become really blind to that have been normalized because we've been around horses for so long. But it just takes someone who's never been around horses and doesn't know what is normal because they haven't had this normalized to ask those questions and be like, that horse doesn't look happy. Because if someone who's never been around horses can tell that horse isn't happy, you can come up with like 20 different excuses that you've been taught over your life, but that person who knows nothing about horses can still see that something's wrong.
Some people just have an eye for that stuff. Like my partner has ridden only when they've ridden with me. They are not a horse person. They just made the unfortunate choice of marrying a horse girl.
Very
But
poor financial decision.
yeah, exactly. But they have the best eye for soundness of anyone I've ever met. I don't know how they do it, but they can pick up that something is wrong with a horse like when I can't. And I've ridden for 23 years now. So like it doesn't take an expert to necessarily see like something's off there.
Yeah. And definitely when you grow up riding and stuff, you're taught to some of us, grew up riding in environments where we were just told to, make the horse do it. And he's not unhappy, that mare, that mare isn't upset. She's not in pain. She's just being a mare. Just ignore it. Just hit her harder, kick her harder, stuff like that we've been taught that from an early age. And to a lot of us, including me, I think we've all been guilty of this. We just become blind to stuff like that and behaviors because we've been taught to ignore it from an early age. That sometimes like one non-horse person who's maybe never even ridden can see that and be like, what's going on there? And then you have to try to explain it. And then you're like, my excuses sound really lame right now. Like,
yeah,
self-reflect and be like, maybe I was taught some things that I should unlearn because some stuff needs to just get tossed out over time.
yeah. And not to rehash content from a different episode, but I just recorded another episode about adult amateurs. And one of the things that we talked about was we are never concerned when, or almost never concerned, when an adult amateur purchases a horse, that horse is going to get beaten over a fence. But when it comes to pros and stuff, there's a very real chance that at some point that horse will get beaten over a fence.
That is very true. And I think sometimes this is another like thing that I guess feel strongly about that a lot of horse people disagree with me on. I let a lot of people ride my horse. If it's safe to do so, I let my friends, like my partner, like everybody who wants to ride my horse Gage has ridden him. And I am very like open to sharing him. Not a lot of horse people are with their horses and they have reasons to be. That's not necessarily wrong. But a lot of people have concerns about, the beginner's going to ruin their horse, going to hurt their horse. And I think a supervised beginner has so much less chance of hurting your horse than the professional that you trust to send your horse to for training, or the professional that gets on your horse and they're like, oh, you're not doing it right, let me do it, and then they beat your horse over a fence. And we accept it from them because they're professionals. But if a beginner got on your horse and started hitting your horse like that, would you allow it? Probably not. And
absolutely
so I don't
not.
I would tolerate that behavior from a professional. Just because they're a professional doesn't mean that it's right to do that kind of stuff.
No, 100%. And I think you hit on something there, which is people discredit you if you share your horse with people. Like I have a friend who has ridden maybe 5 times, and I've thrown them on Jules, who's 5 years old, because he's an angel and he's perfect, and I just like watch them around in hand because he wasn't going to do anything. And I love sharing my horse. It's like one of my favorite things. Like I put my little brother on my horse and he thinks it is like the coolest thing ever. And like I have like 3 people who want to ride him and I'm like, absolutely, please ride my horse. And I think it's fabulous. And like that might not be the case if I had, an 18-hand hot-blooded sports horse, because I wouldn't want anybody getting hurt.
I don't want anyone to get murdered,
Right. But I don't know. I feel like it's good for horses to be ridden by a bunch of different people. It gets them used to different situations.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think a one-person horse is maybe very flattering for the ego, but very impractical in basically every other situation. And my other horse, Willow, she's a little bit greener and a little spicier, so I don't throw everybody on her. But because I'm lucky enough to have a horse that is very good with other people, and he has been a lesson horse before, and he definitely knows who is on him. He knows when he has a beginner on him, and he takes care of them. I'm very lucky to have a horse like that. But I share him with anybody who wants to ride him. And because I'm supervising. I will tell them what to do and what not to do. And if they do something, that harms him, I'm going to step in and I'm going to be like, get off my horse. But I have
Right.
never had that happen. People are always very happy and very flattered and excited to ride him. And if anything, they're almost too concerned about accidentally hurting him that they're like, can I pick his foot? Is it going to hurt him? And I'm like, yes, you can. It's okay. I promise you're not going to hurt him. I think because especially early on in my riding career, I didn't have a horse. I wanted a horse more than anything, but I couldn't really, we weren't in the place to have one at the time. And I got to ride because of the generosity of a lot of other people that allowed me to ride their horse. And I will never not be grateful for that, because to a kid that was horse crazy and just wanted to be around horses in any way possible, that meant the world. And so I can either grow up to be the kind of equestrian that shits on the kind of kid that I once was, or I can, be that person to kids who were like me, who just desperately want to be around a horse, or kids or even adults, because horse girl, I think, knows no age or gender. There are plenty of people who are adults who are horse girls. And I can be that person, lets them ride my horse, and it means everything to them.
No, 100%. I was also the kid who was only riding because other people were generous with their time and with their horses. Like, I had no money to be doing that stuff. Any chance I have to support somebody else who's getting into horses, or to support some kid who likes horses, like, absolutely, I'm going to take that opportunity. Because again, it's about having fun and it's about enjoying the sport. And if there are more people who are in it for the joy of it than who are in it for, like, rewards and accolades, I think we'll be better off.
I think that's definitely true. Yeah. Maybe this is just coming from me because my horses are semi-retired pasture puffs and I'm not the competitive teenager I used to be anymore. But maybe I'm too trusting, but I let people ride my horse. I lend my trailer. I lend my tack. I just do, I guess, what I can to help people when I'm in a position to do so. So I think the horse world would be better off if we had a little bit more of that and less of people, making fun of those kinds of girls, the weird preteen horse girls that, they can't afford a horse. We make fun of lesson kids. Like I see a lot of people make fun of lesson kids and adult beginners and, people who aren't on their level. And a lot of the time, the only difference between an equestrian and a horse girl is money. And I stand by that. A lot of current equestrians were once horseless horse girls that were obsessed with horses. And I think it's sad that they grow up and become, pretty good, like good riders, cool equestrians, and they forget that kid they once were, instead of, keeping that in mind and trying to pay it forward to kids like that. Because I try to remember that I always have that weird little horse obsessed 8-year-old still inside of me. She never went away. I just grew up. So I try to keep
Right.
that in mind, whenever I feel a little bit too on my high horse. I'm like, you are still the weird horse girl you always were. You have not changed. You just got older.
You were also bullied for this in middle school. Be nice.
Exactly. Sometimes, when you were made fun of it, you were made fun of for it in middle school, you want to like turn it around and be like, oh, well, now being a horse girl is cool. Well, now I'm going to use my position to be mean. And then I'm like, no, no, that's the demons talking. Like,
I have seen so many of these cute little edits of lesson horses that these lesson kids have made. And then the comments are full of people being so mean to them for being obsessed with this lesson horse. Like, why are we being mean to this lesson kid? Like, I'm sorry. Oh no, this horse is adored by another 10-year-old. What a shame.
how awful. And they get like people who allow their horses to be used in lessons, they get really weird about it. They're like, well, they get possessive. Yes, it's your horse. You own that horse. But then if the kid says, my horse, or my heart horse, or I love my horse, they get really mad about it. And they're like, he's my horse, you have no claim on him. And it's like, it's a kid who loves your horse.
Yeah,
What could possibly be wrong with that? Unless they're, I don't know, riding him without your permission or doing
absolutely.
something sketchy, in which case you have a right to be mad. But like, there was nothing wrong with that kid loving your horse or buying a halter or some piece of tack for their lesson horse. Yeah, they don't own the horse. Who cares? Who cares? I think it's cute when
It's
kids
so
love my
cute.
horse. I think it's adorable. And I don't care if they say he's my horse or he's my heart horse or we have a bond. I don't care. You could not pay me to care. I think it's the cutest thing ever. And I'm glad that he brings other kids the same joy that he brought me when I was younger. So I
Yeah.
don't see a con to that.
My favorite part about my horse is that he's a barn favorite. Like when he was in like a boarding facility, everybody knew him. And there were several people who I would be tacking him up and they would say hi to Jules and then ask who I was. They had no idea who I was. But they knew my horse and they loved my horse because he's the type of horse who comes over to the fence line and says hi to whoever is walking past and is just like sweet and doofy, and like all the kids loved him. Like there was a couple of times that they got to paint him during summer camp, and so like they were like obsessed with that, and I just loved it. I was like, hell yeah, everybody loves my horse. Like I don't know why you wouldn't feel proud of that.
I love it. Gage was a little bit like that at the barn where I used to board. I boarded for quite a while. Now my horses live at my house, but for like the years that I was boarding at one place, he was like, everyone was like, oh, he's famous. It's Gage, he's famous. And the lesson kids loved him. And yeah, he was in summer camps and lessons. And a girl who used to ride him in lessons actually still comes and visits him every once in a while at my house.
Aww.
Because I'm like, come visit him, come ride him anytime. And I love it. I think it's awesome. Like it makes me happy, and I don't know why it makes other horse owners feel like angry or possessive, I guess, instead of just being like, that is so cute. Like,
Right? Like I don't know. I just don't get it. But to each their own, I suppose. Just maybe the thesis statement of this episode is just like be nicer to each other.
I think that is a good thesis statement. Yeah.
As we start to wrap up, though, I do just want to ask, based on the conversation that we've had today, what advice would you want to share with whoever is listening?
Oh, that is a really good one. Pressure. Let me think. I'm not really sure, because I think horse people come from, a lot of varied backgrounds. There are people who, come from, a lot of money, who are at the top of the sport and they're, competing all the time. And those who, can't afford a horse and, desperately want to have one, and they're like, lesson kids or adult amateurs who can't have a horse, all of that. We definitely need to keep that in mind a lot. And like I said, like you said, like just be kinder and more considerate, especially if you're in a position where you are lucky enough to own a horse and to compete. It's definitely something that, everybody becomes blind to their own privileges. Sometimes we all don't realize what we have. It happens to me too. But I think if you are lucky enough to be in a position even to own a horse, even if your horse is a pasture puff and you ride once a week, even if, it's a struggle to afford them, it's totally a privilege, and we're really lucky to be able to have them. And we definitely forget that because we get caught up in, this other person has more than me. They're jumping higher. They're competing more. They have more horses, nicer tack, all of that. It's hard not to compare yourself, but I think just try and remember the little horse loving elementary schooler inside of you that just was obsessed with horses and would have been thrilled just to sit on one, because you start chasing ribbons and money and all this stuff and you lose sight of that. But if you remember that weird little horse girl you once were, I think it can give you a little bit of perspective to be like, maybe other people have a lot more than I do, but my younger self would still kill to be in my shoes right now. And I try to remind myself of that because, it happens to all of us. Sometimes we forget what we have.
100%. I love that so much. And if somebody is listening to this and they happen not to follow you yet on social media, where can people find you?
Both on Instagram and TikTok. My username is at That.Blue.Roan, after the famous Gage. I don't really have any other social media, so that's kind of it.
I love that. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me and do this. I had such a good time talking with you.
Yeah, me too. This was a lot of fun. This is the first time I've ever been on a podcast.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Well, we will talk to you later. Bye. Thank you for joining us this week at the Horse Girl Gazetteer. You can find us online at Horse Girl Gazetteer on Facebook or Instagram, and Horse Girl Gazette on TikTok and Patreon. You can also email us questions or comments at horsegirlgazetteer@gmail.com. If you find yourself enjoying our content, please leave us a review and share the link with your friends to help others find their way here. Any and all support is greatly appreciated. Talk to you later.